Today with us, we have Omar Figueroa, principal at the law offices of Omar Figueroa, an advocate for cannabis reform, author of legal reference books. He's a purple belt in jiu-jitsu, serves on the board for not-profit entities. The man does it all. Welcome to the show, Omar.
It's a pleasure to be here.
So for the people that don't know you, your office, your business, can you kind of give us that like 30,000 foot look? Tell us who you are, what you do, and then we'll kind of, peel back a little bit more as we dig through the interview here.
Sure. I basically describe myself as a cannabis lawyer. I've been practicing cannabis law for almost 22 years now. I started doing freedom defense, which others call criminal defense. But when I was defending cannabis defendants, I did not think I was defending criminals. I thought I was defending freedom. And so from my perspective, it was freedom defense. And I did that in California for many years, basically from 1998 all the way till 2016 or shortly thereafter when Proposition 64 passed. And after it passed, all my pending felony cases that I was defending just resolved, either as dismissals or infractions or rinky-dink misdemeanors when, the prosecutors just thought they've lost the battle, the drug war is over. And so at that point, I had to do a pivot from doing criminal freedom defense to doing cannabis transactional law. And we'll get into it more later, but, that was basically something that I've been doing for quite a bit, and I've seen the evolution of cannabis law. I also describe myself as a writer because I've seen the laws and how they changed up front. And so I've written a series of books, the latest of which is California Cannabis Laws and Regulations. And it's basically a compilation of all the laws and regulations in California with a handy table of contents and index, because the legislature never thought to put title headers on all these laws that they were writing. And it makes it really difficult to find the exact law. And then something that I figured out as I wrote a book is that you get a better understanding of things. Once you have it in tangible written format, the brain will have a spatial reading of the material that you cannot accomplish with digital material. And then the third way I describe myself is as a corporate director. And I'm on the board right now of the National Cannabis Industry Association, as well as the California Cannabis Tourism Association. And they're both very different trade organizations that are at different points in their evolution. And so it's fascinating for me to work on both. And I'm also a director emeritus of the National Cannabis Industry Association, which is a trade organization for cannabis lawyers. And so I got an opportunity to attend dozens and dozens of legal seminars by very talented, intelligent lawyers who are trying to teach, the gems of knowledge to their peers. And so, I consider myself, I guess, very fortunate to be able to pursue my passion, which is cannabis law.
Awesome. Wow. So you've been pretty much on, everywhere in all parts of the industry, in the tourism, the other industry associations, practicing,
something else. As a Gangier, more recently, I've been working on a project called the Gangier, which is basically a Master of Cannabis Service, and it's developing a certification program for a sommelier for cannabis, somebody who has an expanded vocabulary and a way of systematically assessing cannabis for quality. Wow. And so I spent many hours with some of the luminaries in the cannabis world, and we were sampling some of the world's finest cannabis while we were trying to figure out a systematic assessment protocol that we have come up with. And this Gangier program is something that I'm honored to be a member of as part of the Founders Council. And that dovetails with my experience previously as a judge at the Emerald Cup. So my enthusiasm, many lawyers claim that they're enthusiastic about cannabis because they're casual pot smokers when they're not drinking a beer. Yeah. For me, cannabis is my drug of choice. And, I've been a cannabis enthusiast with undiminished enthusiasm for decades now. And the final part of my work is, doing jiu-jitsu. And so all of my jujitsu has been, there's drunken style kung fu, there's high style jujitsu. All of my jujitsu has been high style jujitsu, and so for me, that's also been part of the cannabis journey.
Man, that's awesome. So you're passionate through and through. One of the things we see about this industry is that people see it as like a money pit. You can just jump in and make a bunch of money, but those people, they're gone within 12 to 18 months. But someone like yourself, sticking power, 22 years of practicing and doing every other thing in the industry. It seems like, man, you're like probably the most well-known name that I haven't come across that often. So I'm very, very glad we got to sit down for today. So kind of let's talk about the firm. We'll go into some of the other aspects of what you participate in for the industry here. So I read on the site here that you have many different parts of the firm here. You've got the local permits and licensing, contracts, intellectual property, establishing and forming corporations. What is kind of the bulk of your work? Because everybody has to get a license, right? I'm assuming that that's probably a big portion of it. So let's talk about kind of what you've seen. It seems like you've been a part of the evolution of all the different parts of the law here. So
Yes.
let's talk
I've
about.
been very fortunate to see all these cannabis businesses from inception to the transition points, or like the like exit points.
Yeah.
And so it's actually been like fascinating because I get to see businesses from their infancy, and also seeing the industry develop from its infancy, and constantly navigating these changing regulations. It's been like tumultuous for people who have tried to follow along from the very beginning. And some of these late entrants are actually like less disadvantaged by the constantly changing regulations that they didn't have to deal with. So it's been pretty fascinating watching it all up front, and watching like some of my clients, businesses start out as like very modest mom and pop enterprises, and now they're talking about these multi-million-dollar deals, and it's just like fascinating to see it. And I'm lucky as an attorney that I get to work with the premium producers and cultivators, and people who are really into growing the finest cannabis that they can possibly do, and don't think that they've already reached it. The people who says, "Oh, I got the world's best cannabis," like a true cannabis connoisseur knows that the world's best cannabis is out there waiting to be developed and discovered and found and appreciated. There's always like something new. It's almost like somebody saying, "Oh, this wine that was bottled 10 years ago is like the epitome of wine, and never shall there be something better." It's not like that. And so,
dig it. So let's go ahead. Let's talk about intellectual property. That's something that jumped out to me on your website, right? So intellectual property, there's brands, there's strains, there's taglines, but there is this, cannabis being federally illegal. I'm guessing that you can't trademark a cannabis strain name or business name because the class of goods would be under cannabis, which is essentially probably not on the trademark application. So
yes, but there are ways, workarounds. And so
let's talk about those then. Yeah.
Yeah. So like a good workaround is not like getting a t-shirt and putting your logo on it, because that is not really considered use in the same category, like you mentioned.
Yeah.
But like U.S. Patent and Trademark Office does allow the registration of intent to use trademark filings. So you could do an intent to use for not something that's illegal, cannabis, but for something that is legal under federal law and registrable, which is hemp. And which so you could do, like, let's say you come up with a name, and let's call that name XYZ. In order to get a trademark for XYZ, you would develop a hemp line of products, or at least you would intend to do that in good faith. Yeah. And then you would file a trademark registration for XYZ in hemp. And then, the different categories, it wouldn't just be like plants and seeds, namely hemp. It would probably include topicals and like anything else that you can, get the USPTO examiners to register. They're getting a lot more discriminating when it comes to like anything that's ingestible, like, for human consumption. But I've seen them register hemp beverages, hemp, ingestibles of all sorts, no worries. So they'll register it. And so that is basically, the way that many are doing it right now. Yeah. And then they are actually developing like two different pillars, of the same brand. And one of the pillars will be a hemp pillar, and that is federally legal. That can get like trademark registration. And then there's also a THC cannabis pillar that cannot get that federal trademark registration. However, it's a way to like have the same brand name under different, I guess different legal regimes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and then to establish basically like ways to get the products into
First commerce and stuff like that.
supermarkets and like just the retail outlets.
Yeah.
Through the hemp pillar, and eventually when cannabis becomes legalized, as everybody expects, as the classification of cannabis as essential throughout all the states, is really showing that there's a very strong public support for federal legalization. I think that it's almost inevitable at this point, that cannabis will become legal. The question is, how will it become legal?
Yeah. And so let's talk about that. Let's talk about legalization a little bit. Is it something you think should come from an executive order? Is it going to be something that, hey, they reschedule it to Schedule 2 and make it really medical grade and, make the barriers for entry even higher for people? What do you kind of see how this plays out since you've been kind of sidelined for so long? What does it look like for national decriminalization or, legalization, just all these different IONs that you can put on the back of things. So
Sure.
kind of what do you think is let's talk about best case scenario or what you think it looks like.
I think our best case scenario is that there's very high voter turnout in November, and that the new administration with Vice President Harris, who co-sponsored the MORE Act, will push forward the MORE Act. The MORE Act made it out of the House, and so I'm pretty confident it could make it through the House, the Senate, if there's like a new Senate, and then ultimately become law. The MORE Act would deschedule cannabis, so 280E would no longer be an impediment, and that would like free up so much like brain power from all of the CPAs, that's being spent on 280E, could not be devoted to like other problems. But that's like an abstruse and Byzantine problem that I think does not need to be with us forever. I think 280E states are numbered, and that's going to be like one of the first effects that we'll see with any descheduling. Anything that gets cannabis below Schedule 2, so Schedule 3 and lower, you don't have to worry about 280E. Schedule 1 and 2, that remains a problem, and that's why I think you're saying there will be a major problem with rescheduling to Schedule 2, because 280E would remain in effect for all the state legal licensed cannabis businesses, and maybe some pharmaceutical companies, would now be allowed to produce like cannabis pharmaceuticals that, can be prescribed, but those would, I think, be treated differently. Yeah. I think I think it's too late for the pharmaceutical industry right now to start producing cannabis pharmaceuticals and to demand that all state licensed businesses shut down, because now there's federal cannabis products.
That genie's out of the bottle by now. There's too much. Yeah, we're gonna have to kind of keep pushing forward. And it's not a beautiful process. We would love for it to be open and kind of free market. Like what Oklahoma looks like. It's like anybody can get a license down there as long as you're a resident and have $2,500 in a heartbeat. But when you look at kind of the California framework,
that's what California used to be. California used to have a laissez-faire cannabis system. We had an incredible product diversity, no testing. Cannabis is such a safe substance that there was like very few like reported, incidences of harm due to this unregulated laissez-faire cannabis market that we had in California for many, many years, from 2004 till 2016, a dozen years. It was crazy. Like California used to be like Oklahoma is now, Wild West.
Yeah, I remember I moved out to LA when I graduated in 2009, because the recession was happening. I was like, I don't want to be in Detroit. Let's go out to California and see what the cannabis thing is. And there was like shops everywhere. There was growers everywhere, and it kind of seemed a little bit more, like I said, open and laissez-faire compared to what they are now. And then there was a lot of pushback or some friction, I would say, when Prop 64 pushed. The people that were already in the industry are like, hell no, don't push this thing, because it makes the more red tape for the industry. So
a lot of red tape.
Yeah. So when you kind of look at the framework now, go ahead.
Well, I would say the laissez-faire industry was pretty sweet for operators, back in the golden era of California cannabis. Because if you're an operator, you did not have state taxes, you did not have local regulations, you did not have any state regulatory agencies telling you how to mind your business. All you had to do basically is not get busted by the cops. And that was fairly accomplishable just by having good neighbor relations and not being an asshole,
Yeah.
pardon my French.
No.
Uh, and so, um, so it was very different, now, because of permits and entitlements, like I've heard quite the opposite of instead the good neighbor policy. Like sometimes now you have operators who are saying, I have a right to do this, and telling the neighbors like, tough luck, it's my permit, your problem, I'm allowed to do this. And that's very different from the old cannabis culture where it was all about not drawing attention to oneself, going with the flow, being a good member of society. And I really like that old cannabis culture that I represented all those growers for decades. And,
Yeah.
they're wonderful people. I used to say that some of the last free people in America were cannabis growers because they did not have to work for the man on the 9 to 5. And, they were liberated by their profession so that they could pursue their passion beyond cannabis, which oftentimes was like surfing, or it was art or activism. Many of my clients did incredible things because in order to be a cannabis grower, you have to be a long-range planner and be able to conceive of and execute multi-month type projects. And that also lent itself to doing really cool art and really cool activism and, really cool projects of all sorts. So that for me was exciting. And what attracted me to becoming a cannabis lawyer was like the people who were attracted to cannabis were unique, interesting people, especially the ones who were crazy enough to make it their life and, become growers. Nowadays, it's still the same way. Many people who are going to cannabis, there's like criticism that people are drawn primarily for the money, but, anybody whose eyes are open can see that it's not like a river of money and all you have to do is get splashed, and that's not.
There seems like there's no money in cannabis. There's like this whole, I think the media is really blowing out that green rush discussion and like, oh, there's going to be so much money, but you have to have a war chest to start this. So just kind of dive into California cannabis or even cannabis abroad in the entire United States. It takes like $250,000 to $1 million reasonably to get started. And that's still on the lower end, compared
and if you have 280E, there's no guarantee of profits at the end. So many times I do warn my clients, like, if you like to make a small fortune in cannabis, start with a large fortune, because, it's a good way for them to moderate their expectations and, to understand that, the cannabis industry is extremely challenging. I do have some clients who are like ultra agile and who are making a profit in super challenging competitive environments. And they work so hard, they're like super smart on it. They've been doing it for years, top of their game, and they're always working. And so there's no easy money in cannabis,
the effective rate per hour is probably so low. They're like making, $20 an hour when they're running like, an industry with the red, target on their back that any day they could get hit with anything from any level of the government. So it makes sense.
Yeah. I mean, it's amazing what some of these, entrepreneurs are able to do. And, like some of them are building like small empires before like my very eyes. And I'm just like absolutely amazed at, their perseverance, their hard work, they're like embodying the Horatio Alger, pull yourself up by your bootstraps work ethic. It's pretty cool to see.
So let's kind of switch gears a little bit and talk about one of the conversations that doesn't get enough light. I'd like to talk a little bit about social equity. And for those that don't know what social equity is such that certain populations have been disproportionately disadvantaged by the war on drugs, and typically people of color. And so you see different cities and states regulating such that the businesses or some of the businesses have to have licenses going to particular people that meet specific criteria. So when you see these things, they look great on paper, but a lot of the execution we're seeing has been lackluster, to say the least. Specifically, Los Angeles had a total cluster down there. You see Illinois is kind of dropping the ball a little bit, and I'm sure every other one is having that issue of some sort, some scale. Tell me a little bit about your thoughts around social equity and potentially some tips and tricks, not tricksy, but tips for these social equity business potential owners to really get their foot in the door. Because one of the things we're seeing here is that big conglomerates go and they get a person who qualifies as social equity, pay them $100,000 a year to kind of be a figurehead. So when the BCC comes in, they can say, oh yeah, that's Michael and he's part of our business and he's social equity, but he's just collecting a check and being a front for the business. So kind of if you could talk a little bit about social equity and maybe some
Sure.
tips for these people here.
Yeah, like social equity applicants, the first thing they should do is number one, get sound legal advice from like independent counsel. That means like your lawyer, not the lawyer for whoever you're making a deal with. And it's really important to maintain control of your business. Most of these local ordinances require that the social equity applicant be like a majority owner of the business, but it's important to maintain control as a majority owner and to be active in the decision making. This is like a really amazing opportunity if taking advantage of the proper way. And that means you have to get proper technical assistance. CPA tax assistance is absolutely critical when starting up your business, and you have to structure the proper way and start the proper accounting methodologies so that you can fully take advantage, because you're operating with 280E. It's such a disadvantage on cannabis businesses. Sometimes it's said that it's like a 70% effective margin on your business. And so if you don't plan ahead of time, you could end up penalized and at a tremendous disadvantage. So I would say that's where you would start, is getting professional assistance, but also making sure that you're not divested of control, that you have your own attorney that you can check in with, because you have to understand that the attorney who's working for your deal partner is probably not looking out for your best interest. Their best interest is to make sure that the deal goes through on the terms of whoever's paying their fee. And so if you're not paying their fee, and you have not signed a third-party payor form, that means that you're not the client. They're not looking out for you. So those are good things to look out for as social equity applicants. Another one is do like plenty of vetting of your potential partners to make sure that they don't have any lawsuits. In the age of Google, you should be Googling them. And if they've been involved in extensive litigation, which indicates to you that they don't live up to their promises, then don't make deals with people who don't live up to their promises unless you're expecting expensive litigation. And that's not a viable economic strategy. Like, I'm gonna pay for an expensive lawsuit is nothing an investor ever wants to hear. And so I would say, vet who you work with carefully, because litigation can be scary to investors. The other part I would say is, remember, you're going to need to raise funds as an entity in the future. So you don't want to give close to half up from the outset. Give up a small portion if somebody wants equity, because you're going to need to raise more funds in order to scale up. And if you've already given up a lot of the money, you will not be in a position to raise more funds without giving up control. And so you want to be in a position where you can maintain control over the long term. That's why it's good for you to talk to an attorney and get your own attorney. And then when you're looking for an attorney, I think it's always good, and I always tell my clients, because I understand choosing an attorney is almost like a beauty contest.
Yeah, what are we looking for in an attorney? Tell us what we should be looking for in an attorney.
Somebody that you can communicate well and who listens to you closely. The first thing I would do is make sure that the attorney listens to what I say. An attorney who is not actively listening to you as a client is not a good attorney, because they're going to miss out all the details of what you're trying to tell them. They're going to be expensive because you're going to have to tell them the same thing over and over again, and you're going to have to pay for it. So I would say efficiency and communication is something else. There's lawyers who just like to hear themselves ramble on at length and build their clients for that. And you as a client may think this lawyer really knows what they're saying. But if every time you talk to them, they're just rambling at length, and that turns into billable hours, then that could end up, not being what you bargained for when you thought this lawyer talks great.
Yeah. Or they say, oh, I'm cheap per hour, but then they end up burning up hours just like telling you this or that, or bill you for every little nuance and every email and this and that. So,
Oh yes, I've had clients like who basically have complained about like law firms that charge for having 3 attorneys on a phone call, and so now
oh
it's
my
like thousands of dollars per hour for having multiple lawyers on the same phone call. And I think of course, it's better to have many minds. What I do in my law firm, the way we do it is we have a morning call every morning where all the lawyers participate in like a roundtable discussion, and we workshop all of the interesting and novel legal issues that we run across in our work. And we don't charge clients extra for that, for having like 3 other legal minds like thinking about it.
wow.
But it makes us, we have like a little legal think tank, and all the lawyers enjoy that because like every morning we share the news updates in the cannabis world, and we talk about like the latest legal developments, and then we go through all the legal problems that we're currently working on. And this is how should we approach this issue, how should we approach that issue. And it's definitely the case that no matter how smart you are, more minds are better than one.
Oh yeah. I mean, you get you're probably the easiest to be taken advantage of when you think you know everything, and
Yeah.
there's no such thing as being like the 100% subject matter expert in cannabis, because it's always changing, but at least you have the frameworks to digest and understand, looking at precedents and things of that nature. So that's great that you do that. So let's switch gears and talk about the team a little bit.
Uh-huh.
Beside yourself, who's on the team kind of making sure that clients are achieving their goals, the business is running smoothly? Because it's cannabis is a team sport. It's not just the operator. It's not just Omar. There's probably a lot of people. So let's talk a little bit about your team then.
Sure. I'll just give a shout out to Lauren Mendelson, my senior associate, as well as Andrew Kingsdale, who's been working for us for a couple of years and now is of counsel, as well as our newest associate, Tiffany Karari, as well as Barbara Marlin, who is our office manager, and Usha Gorsha, who is our receptionist. And so we have a really strong, cohesive team. And I'll start off with Lauren. Lauren is on the board of the International Cannabis Bar Association.
Wow.
And she has been a cannabis lawyer for many years. I think like her whole career pretty much she's devoted to cannabis law, and is one of the most knowledgeable young millennials out there on this subject of cannabis law. It's like one of her true passions. And so, I would say like, she is super passionate about cannabis, helps contribute to our blog and updates the website, helps keep us all on track on the latest legal developments. Because like me and everybody else on the team, we're kind of all cannabis law nerds. And so we're like all subscribed to the latest Google News updates on anything cannabis law related. And we're always like feeling for like, new changes in enforcement or in the law or in regulatory updates. And because we're all working collectively on the book, we're always keeping track of how the laws and regulations are evolving. And so, it's great to like, have Lauren as kind of like the senior associate, and, she travels to many events like the Sonoma County Growers Alliance, where she was a board member for a long time, and then many cannabis conferences as a speaker. And so she's like a very able public speaker. You can throw her anywhere and give her 5 minutes of preparation, and she will come up with like well-informed, thoughtful discussion that, will get your head scratching. And so I like working with people like that who are highly intelligent, and, their intelligence is unpredictable. We also have like Andrew Kingsdale, and he's been a lawyer for like more than a decade now. He has a lot of litigation experience and a ton of transactional experience. And he's worked on quite a few deals at our law offices, and, many contracts and many leases. And so it's really fun working with Andrew because of his really analytical mindset. And so he's able to like spot all these novel and interesting legal issues that we get to spend our days workshopping on. Yeah. And so it's fun to work with people who are always like, keep you on your tiptoes, and, just making the practice of law exciting, which was my idea when I started my law firm. I didn't want to have like a staid law firm where nobody talked. And everybody was whispering quietly and just kind of toiling away in tried desperation. But instead, I want to have like a cannabis think tank where people are discussing and debating the policy and legal questions of the day. Finally, we have our newest associate, Tiffany Karari, who we took on after the COVID pandemic started. And so she's like a remote associate that we've been working with. And she used to work with Allison Margolin down in Southern California. Gave her a great recommendation. And so I said, okay, I'll take a chance. And we brought Tiffany to work on projects. And, you know, she has like experience on like super complicated projects involving many different types of agreements and many moving pieces and, you know, different conditions and closings and disclosures. And it's really excellent to work with her because she also has a background before cannabis working in the highly regulated wine industry. And so her deep knowledge of the wine industry, like, you know, allows us to have insight on how to develop our distribution or our management agreements. Just because the wine industry is like 100 years more developed than the cannabis industry, they've had to deal with these issues in a lot finer grain detail than we have at this juncture.
Wow. So you have it's like a powerhouse team, a multidisciplinary look at the kind of the legal side of cannabis. Everyone has their own thing that they're very pumped up about. So that's fantastic. So if you guys need a lawyer, you guys should surely reach out to Omar and his team and get that moving. Do you service anybody outside of California? Do you do interstate deals or other different states?
Yes. Like normally, like our clients are located all around the world. We have some clients located in Canada, some located in other states. But generally, the deals that we work with are within California because we're licensed California lawyers. But we are at the point of thinking of expanding the scope of the law firm and going to other jurisdictions. You know, now that Vermont has become the 11th state to legalize adult use of cannabis, and they're having a preference for, you know, minority women-owned businesses and strong social equity provisions, it's becoming an attractive place to look at.
Yeah, I think like the Northeast is going to be the next big wave, right? You're going to see probably New Jersey will pass it. You got Vermont, New York, the Pennsylvania will come. It's just kind of, you know, there was rumblings about like a Northeast kind of cannabis pact that they're going to kind of keep everything looking the same for all these states so they can do the interstate commerce. So I'm really excited to see what the Northeast can pull off related to cannabis. For sure. And then so
now that you mentioned, you know, cannabis commerce, I'm really excited about seeing like global cannabis commerce starting with interstate commerce here because, you know, California has such a wealth of cannabis, but, you know, for all the accolades California gets, there are many areas in the United States that also grow legendary cannabis. And I for one would like to taste the original Makanushka Thunderfuck from Alaska.
Yeah.
You know, we have like interstate commerce.
Yeah, man. And Maui Wowie, or, you know, there was like a story of, I was in Oklahoma this past week and I got to meet some of the growers that are in southeast. And there's this county, I forget what it is, but the city I was in is called Broken Bow. And essentially like all the guys and gals that went from to Humboldt were all from Broken Bow. They all started in Oklahoma. There was like, you know, National Guard coming in there. It's like in the 70s and 80s. There's a huge story behind it that I think, yeah, California's got a great brand and they've done very well. And I think there's the halo effect of California is an awesome place. They must have awesome cannabis, which they do. But yeah, like you said, there's a lot of other corners of the country and the world abroad that can grow really great cannabis. The last interview I just did was with a guy from British Columbia. You know, BC bud is a real big thing, you know, that people in the north knew a lot. Being in Michigan, I would see French Ziploc bags coming through our neighborhood. It's like, wow, all right, this stuff is really coming from Canada. So yeah, I mean, there's a lot to do for it. But that kind of brings up a thing here is that there is a lot of places that have cannabis. There's a lot of places in California that do not have cannabis. It's 2/3 of the jurisdictions do not allow commercial cannabis activity. So one of the big things about that is we're seeing that the cannabis delivery lawsuit, essentially the BCC being sued by a couple dozen local municipalities, not allowing deliveries coming into their city. You know, what is your familiarity with the case and kind of your thoughts on how this is going to shake out? Because this could be pretty detrimental to the California cannabis industry, creating more red tape for these operators. So what are your thoughts around that case?
Yes, I spoke with a few delivery operators last week as I was on a panel discussing this very same issue. And they said if the lawsuit succeeds and the plaintiff cities um, basically are allowed to forbid the Bureau of Cannabis Control from permitting deliveries to the banned cities or banned counties. Santa Cruz is one of them. And basically what they're trying to do is they're engaging in economic protectionism. They don't want, businesses from outside their jurisdiction making deliveries and not having to pay their local taxes. And so that's ultimately what the issue is about. How will that play out? Currently, the status is that there's going to be a hearing on November 16th, and the court made the plaintiff cities like submit all this briefing about whether or not they had actual ordinances that prohibited deliveries or whether they were just suing hypothetically.
Or any damages at all, yeah.
Yeah, whether or not there was any ripe case or controversy before the court. And so that's the next step in the lawsuit. But it's pretty certain that it's going to be appealed all the way to the California Supreme Court. And that may take several years. And it's anticipated that things that will continue the way they have. The status quo will remain in effect. And that means that deliveries will continue statewide. But when it's resolved, if statewide deliveries are not allowed, then it's really going to create a headache for many delivery services, because now they will have to deal with compliance, and they're going to have to keep track of which jurisdictions allow and which don't allow delivery. I think at that point, the Bureau of Cannabis Control would probably step in and come up with official lists to make it easy for the operators to know what's okay and what's not okay. That's the only rational, result of it. But right now there's deep concern that they're going to have to spend a lot of time having to filter out requests from banned jurisdictions. And then really, what are these banned jurisdictions fighting for? They're really fighting for an unregulated market in their jurisdiction, because it's not like they can prohibit cannabis activity from happen. The black market is going to happen no matter what. And so it's like a return to the failed era of cannabis prohibition. I think these cities should just deal with it. Prohibition does not work. Regulation is the only way to deal with cannabis. And they can come up with more strict regulations that are based on, accomplishing their policy objectives instead of these blanket bans that do not accomplish what they think they're going to accomplish.
Yeah, and those cities are still collecting sales tax, because in California, if you don't know this, they have origin and destination sales tax, where the product takes off from and where it delivers to. Even though they banned cannabis, they're still collecting sales tax on that. So it's
apportionment in California, right? Yeah, I think that's something that the cities don't quite understand, that they would still collect, like you're saying, the apportioned sales tax.
Yeah, so it's kind of an incongruence if they're speaking out of both sides of their mouth. They want the money, but they don't want the industry, and I guess there's that stigma. It's like more of a generational thing. I think the older people in power. Nancy Reagan did a really good job of scaring the hell out of people. Just say no to drugs. So maybe they're really holding on to that. But let's talk about now. Kind of, if you could snap your fingers and change one thing about the cannabis industry overall or the California industry, what would that one thing be?
The cannabis industry overall, it would certainly be federal legalization and lack of interstate commerce. I think they would, my definition of federal legalization would include repeal all cannabis prohibitions, deschedule, and then just allow interstate commerce and allow states to regulate it. Basically federalism. Let the states be laboratories of democracy, and the ones that want to continue this failed experiment with prohibition can knock themselves out, but everybody else can, go to the new millennium. And so, as far as at the state level with the cannabis, assuming that we're not going to, start all over again, I would give cultivators direct consumer access a few times a year, maybe once or twice a year, like with the Emerald Cup, where they're able to have farmers markets and direct consumer access, which are basically temporary retail permits once or twice a year.
Oh, I like that. That's a great idea. I've heard there was in Southern California, there was I don't know how long ago this was, but there was those farmers markets where you can go and kind of pick up cannabis and meet the growers behind it. It's because it's a local based business. You're not traveling 100 miles to pick up your cannabis unless you're in a cannabis desert and there is nothing around. But yeah, having the access to chat and meet with you people who are actually growing your cannabis in the hands that touch it. I'm guessing there's many people along that process. So that's great suggestions there. What would be, you've seen a lot, you've seen a ton of things, the evolution of the industry. Let's talk about some kind of tips for the people trying to get into this industry that most people don't talk about, right? Yeah, lawyer up, get a CPA, have a lot of money. Don't get in bed with people that are, total bad people and bad actors. What are some other things that you think are tips or advice or thoughts and considerations that these newer businesses should think about, whether they're getting into the California industry specifically, or maybe the cannabis industry at large? What are some things that you and your team see are good leading indicators of what's going to be a successful cannabis business?
Well, I always think attention to detail will always tell you. And so, pay close attention to detail is the leading indicator, I think, of success. And, but other good tips are, let me think about that, focus on longevity. It's a marathon, not a sprint. People have long memories in the cannabis industry, despite cannabis effects on memory.
Yes.
And, it takes years to build trust, but seconds to lose it. And, I think it's really important for, what else? Be really careful with your social media and avoid permit patty, type scenarios. What are the good things for the small, business? I mean, I would say any inspiring cannabis business, should consider that this has been declared as an essential industry, and there's incredible opportunities. This is a good time to get into the cannabis industry because it's an essential industry. You can actually open a business these days in most of the United States, and that can't be said for most businesses.
Yeah, it's open and it's going to be mandated to stay open when the lockdowns come, which probably are going to happen again and again because we just can't seem to get our hands around this thing. So it's good to know that those are some good tips there. Good deal. So what else have we not covered that you think people should know about? What other topics do you want to talk about in this that are things that, don't get talked about enough, whether it's the cannabis industry in California specifically, overall, maybe specifically about ancillary services? What are some things we should talk about for the latter half of this presentation here?
Oh, sure. Well, we can definitely talk about cannabis and jiu-jitsu, which is an area of interest.
Yeah.
And maybe we can do that now.
Let's do it.
Yeah. So, I've been doing jiu-jitsu for many years, and it's not something I'm talented at, the same way that I was kind of talented at school. And, I went to Yale and went to Stanford Law School, and I was good at school. I'm the opposite at jiu-jitsu. I'm like a very bad student. I'd probably be like a D student in gym. And so jiu-jitsu is interesting because it's something that is very technically difficult. But, there's a saying in jiu-jitsu, it's like the black belts are the ones who stayed and everybody else dropped out. And so I've been doing it for a few decades now. And, I'm not very good by any means. I'm a purple belt. That was like the level Anthony Bourdain was when he passed away. But, it's something that's very challenging. And for me, it's something I've always done while with cannabis. I've always used cannabis right before jiu-jitsu class, and it helped me attain a state of flow. It did make it more difficult to remember the move, and so I had to go probably twice as many classes as I would have had to attend otherwise. But it did make the experience more enjoyable, and certainly afterwards, when I was all beat up, after tapping out countless times and getting choked out and getting wrist locked and arm locked and leg locked and every type of lock, it was always good to have cannabis as a therapy, and allowed me to function the next day and be a productive lawyer. And so the style I developed is high style jiu-jitsu, and kind of like drunken style kung fu. It's unorthodox moves, but it's something that I've slowly developed for myself, and I encourage everybody to give jiu-jitsu a try. It's something that many people are very surprised that they enjoy it. You know, it takes maximal body engagement, and you're really using like all four limbs independently at the same time, and as well as your head as an accessory limb when, you know, your other limbs are busy. And so it's something that's like a chess game, and you're trying to think a few steps ahead of the game, and it becomes ever more challenging under the influence of cannabis.
Wow, that's pretty cool. Yeah, I didn't. Yeah, purple belt is still pretty good for getting up there and moving forward in that. And yeah, I mean, sports in cannabis is. Think you'll see more of that convergence. I think there's different major leagues now are saying, hey, it's acceptable if you're in the jurisdiction where it's acceptable. I think you'll see more of that. It's not. I don't think it's a performance enhancing drug. I think it's more of a recovery type of thing, for
Oh
sure.
yeah, I was talking to one of my colleagues because he's going to talk about, he's going to give a continuing legal education seminar on attorney use of cannabis. And, you know, the basic rule seems to be that in states where it's legal, attorney use of cannabis does not present a problem by itself. Of course, any impairment, any, you know, performance impairment that is independent or that is caused by the cannabis, that's a different thing.
Yeah.
But just the use of cannabis is not something that's disqualifying for attorneys. And, you know, it's funny because the California Commission on Judicial Performance, or no, the California Judicial Council issued guidance on lawyers about lawyers owning, you know, cannabis businesses.
Mhm.
And it said judges cannot own a cannabis business because that would be unseemly under federal law, but it did not bring up the issue of judges using cannabis at all, which I thought was like, you know, the loudest dog is the one that didn't bark. And
No, that makes sense, you know, and I'm actually a yoga teacher, so I know about some of the benefits when, yeah, you're trying to stretch and do certain things. It can be pretty tough, but, you know, and not overthinking what you're doing as well. So, and just kind of allowing your body to move is the great machine that it is. So that's great to
oh, that's
hear.
awesome. Yeah, I've
Yeah.
done Gangier yoga as well, and I find it like, you know, quite engaging. Yeah.
Yeah, it's fun. It's something different. You know, yeah, I've done yoga for like, I think 6, 7 years now as a certified yoga instructor.
Awesome.
And yeah, getting people, sometimes you need something a little extra like that to get people into the studio. You know, there's what he would say, like a story about yoga that it's only for ladies or it's only for the weak people. But then, hey, I would say any guy or gal, get out there and try yoga. It's really, really extremely tough. And then you get a little cannabis in you when you try to do it, lose your balance that much easier. So
That's right. It's even more challenging. Yes.
100%.
Yeah, I've gone to yoga class high as well. And you know, in Sebastopol, the yoga teacher is like, oh, I like that smell. And so,
Yeah, let's talk about Sebastopol. You had your office in downtown San Francisco, I believe, right? Like a major DMA, and then you moved out to the Sonoma County countryside. It sounds like. What was the
yeah.
choice for that move? Why move that far out? I'm guessing rent is one driver of that, but why move out to the county?
Oh, you know, the main driver was proximity to my caseload. I had a lot of, I had my law offices in San Francisco, initially at Pier 5 on the waterfront, you know, spectacular real estate. We used to have killer parties. I used to be part of Pier 5 law offices, which was a group of criminal defense lawyers led by Tony Serra. And they were basically like hardcore San Francisco criminal defense attorneys, most of them specialized in drug cases. And it was almost like, a food court of lawyers. You know, some lawyers specialized in murder cases. Tony Serra specialized in jury trials. Anything that went to trial was Tony's case. Other lawyers really liked the cocaine cases. I loved cannabis and cannabis cases. And the reason for that was that they were the best clients of all. You know, number one, I did not represent informants. And so the, you know, the snitches were usually not the cannabis people. And they were the cocaine or the meth or the other defendants.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, that's something that for me was like, you know, really important, is like to not represent people who were informants. And then I just liked them because they're like, always did their homework. I told them, like, you got to get a job, do community service, and do get into school, and you probably won't go to jail. And every client who followed that advice ended up not going to jail in the end. You know, if they did work, school, community service. Kind of logical, but
Yeah.
you know, it's just like being a lawyer / life coach. And so I was a lawyer in San Francisco for 12 years, and I was living in Berkeley, and it was a very high-paced lifestyle. I would wake up at 5 o'clock in the morning. I'd drive to my office in San Francisco, pick up my file at 6:30, and then drive to wherever court was, like Mendocino County, and I had to be at the courthouse at 8:30. And so I would walk through the courthouse doors at 8:20, and I'd be sitting, in court waiting for the judge to take the bench at 8:30. Then I would have to wait for all the cases to get called, and then my case would get called, and then I had to drive all the way back to San Francisco and then drive back to Berkeley. And so that was like a typical day for me, and I did that for a dozen years, and I started really getting sick of it. And so in 2010, I moved to Sonoma County, which is like pretty sweet, halfway point between San Francisco and where most of my cases were, Mendocino County. And when I moved there in 2010, there was like a crackdown in Sonoma County on cannabis. Oh, and so all of a sudden I had a ton of local cases that I was now defending. And I had moved to Sebastopol to have my first kid. I mean, I really moved for quality of life. I love Berkeley. I love the diversity and the energy and the fast pace. But for having kids, it just seemed different. And so I wanted something that was a little bit slower. And so I moved to Sonoma County basically to have children, and I got to live through the, golden sunset of Sonoma County. And now that, now there's fire season, but when I first moved there, we didn't have to deal, through those climate change-induced changes. And so it was pretty interesting, like moving from, I was initially viewed as a big city lawyer because that's how I had made my reputation. And then when I moved to Sebastopol, I just went around saying, I'm a small town lawyer. And, people were like, yeah, but you're a big city gunslinger before. And I was like, yeah, but I'm a small time lawyer now. And it was a different approach.
That's awesome. That's great. It's good to make that move. It's kind of why I left LA as well. It was just too fast paced. I'm not having children yet, but yeah, you look for different things, I guess, in different seasons of your life. And it seems like you found what you really were looking for.
Oh yeah. I mean, it was wonderful being in San Francisco during the rave years.
Yeah, for sure. For sure. Well, we're kind of winding down here. Is there any last things you'd like to share? Where can we find your group on the internet? On what's the website, the Instagram? Where can we find you at?
Sure. You can find us at our website, omarfigueroa.com. And then we're on all the social media at Omar Figueroa Law. So on Facebook, on Instagram, on Twitter. And, we maintain a pretty strong social media presence. And, we're really thankful for you featuring the many people in the cannabis industry and then documenting the evolution of this amazing industry. We hope that your show is on for many years and grows wildly successful. And thank you for doing this for everybody.
Hey, you're very welcome. Thank you. And we couldn't do it without the people that watch these videos. So anybody that's watching this, please reach out to Omar if you have questions about your cannabis business and the legal side of things. Again, I said this before, and I say almost in every recording that cannabis is a team sport. You can't do this alone. And you got to build a strong fence. And every pole is a professional service provider, a vendor, a client, a customer, whatever it is. Bring the right people around you and have the right team. Again, like you said, it's a marathon, not a sprint. You need a whole team to lift you across that finish line. So, Omar, thank you very much for your time today. It's been such a beautiful time chatting with you. I'm sure we'll chat. We'll probably have you on again at some point when there's major updates in the industry. So again, thank you for your time today.
It's been a pleasure. Stay Irie.